Welcome, Outfest family. So excited to talk to the people behind Ahead of the Curve. We were thrilled to screen it here at Outfest Los Angeles and excited to have this Q&A with you all. I'm Carrie Stoughton-Jackson, Deputy Director of Outfest, and I'll turn it over to everybody to introduce themselves and their relationship with the film, and then we'll get to some questions.
Okay, I'm Jen Rainin. I'm the director of the film. And this lovely lady is Franco Stevens, who, well,
I'm the founder of Curve Magazine and the subject of the documentary.
That's right.
Kim?
Okay, I was like, should I? My name is Kim Catherine Crosby. I am in the film. I live between the US and Canada and have been involved in a lot of work within the queer community for over a decade, 15 years maybe now, a long time.
Hello, I'm Andrea Pino Silva, and I'm the Impact and Community Engagement Producer with Ahead of the Curve, as well as a subject and a community advocate, scholar, and writer.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. I want to go to, where did the idea for this film start, and how did that come to be? And Franco, if you needed some talking into to do it.
So I married this extraordinary creature, and I knew about Curve, of course, but I didn't actually come up with it. And so, you know, in the first years of our marriage, I really started to learn about the impact that she had on the community over the years. And she would, from time to time, say these things like, oh yeah, you know, I didn't have any money when I started. I was broken. And so I took out 12 credit cards in one day and I cashed them all out. And I went to the racetrack and bet on the horses to get the money to start the magazine. And you know, little things like that, she would say, or, oh yeah, there was this time I got sued by Catherine Deneuve. You know, just in passing, like it wasn't a big deal because it's part of her history and it's just part of the story. But I started realizing, my God, this is a fantastic story. This would make a great fiction film, because who's going to believe it anyways, right? It's amazing. So I started writing the screenplay. And in doing the research for the screenplay, I started to realize, you know, there wasn't a lot of source material out there. There's not a lot of queer women's history that's been well documented. Mm-hmm. And in talking with some of the folks who ended up in the film and a lot of the folks who informed the film, I realized the need to document this story well, so that young women coming up now can see their lineage, can see their heritage, where they came from. And, you know, it's a powerful thing when you have that. So that's where it came from.
And I might say it was quite exposing. Yeah. So during the film took a little turn. It was originally about, you know, me starting the magazine up to the time of the name change. And we were at a festival in Las Vegas, and I got a call from the current owner of the magazine saying, yeah, I don't know that the magazine's going to make it through the year. And that's when the movie took a turn to kind of what is the state of the community right now for women. And I decided the best way to find out what the community needs now is for me to contact some young activists. And that's where Kim and Andrea came into the film, mm-hmm. To see what the community needs next and how we even like to, you know, use the terminology. Do we, you know, is the community still embracing of the word lesbian? Do they prefer queer? Do they prefer no terms? How does that work? So really, I'm owing it to the next generation to, you know, kind of lead the way.
Andrea, I assume that you knew the Curve history really well, or was some of this new to you as you were going through the process?
So it's funny because I knew of Curve really more as a student and as a scholar. I literally picked up Curve in a classroom. And it's really interesting because I was at the time researching women's media representation. I was actually focusing on Latinas And one of my professors said, this is really interesting because Curve kind of took a very different approach on portraying queer women as their own storytellers. And that was, to me, fascinating. And I had never really seen anything like it. And I think especially now, past Obergefell, now that we have the right to marry, what's next? And I argue it's what's always been the battle, and that's representation, and that's being able to tell our own stories, and our own stories that are complex, that are about our womanhood, that are about our sexuality, our gender, our race, our ability. And we can only tell those stories if we're the ones that are actually writing it. And I think that very much now we need Curve, but we need more of our stories out there. And I think that's what the film does a really good job of doing, is showing all the ways that queer women are telling their own stories and how we need to invest in those more than ever.
Yeah. Kim, what was your introduction to Curve?
It's so at the time I was running a nonprofit called the People Project, and I was working like very, very focused with LGBT youth, particularly around creating educational programs where we were reflected. And I remember I used to go to, there was a bookstore kind of down the street from where I would live, and I would go every weekend and I would find everything gay I could find and would just like pull stacks and would go through like all the magazines I could find, any kind of content, anything. And I was just, I was doing research for creating all of this kind of course content. But at the same time, as everyone has kind of reflected, I was looking for representation. I was looking for stories or examples that we had been here before and that there was a legacy that I could connect to. And, at the time I was in Toronto, and Curve wasn't always on the shelves because it would always get sold out. So I would really have to like make sure I was timed very well at the time of the month when I would get there and get my stack and make sure that I was going through everything. And it was also, Curve was one of the resource materials that we used with the youth who were in our program. So we ran a program called Outwards, and it ran every year for 5 years, and we worked with a diversity of queer and trans and LGBT young folks, really a huge range. So, deaf Peruvian gay boys and like Inuit, lesbians, like really, it was just so vast in terms of the kind of representation. And we always would have content like Curve available for everyone so that people could have that experience. A lot of the folks, especially in Canada, a lot of the people who were present were refugees. Canada accepts, I think, the most refugees in the world who are LGBT. And that was a huge portion of the population who would be involved in our program. So for so many people, they're coming from places where not only were they never given permission to be themselves, but accessing content like that was patently illegal. So, this was also such a moment of awakening, watching people experience this kind of culture for the first time. And I think the significance of having that kind of representation and having, things that you can pass and share, and watching that was so formative for people's entire growth. So.
Well, that's one of the things I loved about the film. And Jen, I wonder if you could talk about that, because I thought you did an excellent job of, one, telling a personal story, a personal history. And then you did a history of a magazine or like a cultural document. But then you also did such a great job of doing a snapshot of the history of our community, of the lesbian community in particular, both prior to Curve starting, throughout the history of Curve and Curve's interaction with that, and where we are now. And all of those stories were both the history, the where they were at the moment and where they're going, both that personal Curve piece and community piece. And did you go in thinking about that, or because it felt almost so well plotted out, or did that come through with the interviews and the texture? It was just so layered. I loved it.
Wow, thank you. It was very intentional, and also, what I really, this is my first film that I've made.
Well, wouldn't know. There are always great first films. I don't quite mean it like that, but you did a great job of weaving it all together.
Well, thank you. I learned so much. Rivka, my co-director and I joke a lot about how this film is really like a masterclass for me. And then it was a masterclass and another masterclass, another masterclass. I think really, I mean, this film really evolved over time quite a bit, as Frank was saying. You know, we started really with the historical but we always knew, even when telling the historical story, we wanted to make sure that we were helping audiences understand why what happened in the 90s and the 2000s is important today and how we might make those connections. So it has been important since the start that we find ways to weave all these together, and it really was challenging to do in a way that felt engaging and authentic, and just hearing you talk about it just is very gratifying, because it seems like it worked the way we chose to do it.
Did you plot it out? I mean, you said before that you were writing the screenplay as a narrative before. I'm curious if you kind of flipped that in thinking about it as a doc, and did you plot out these points that you wanted to hit, or did they just inherently kind of land?
So the narrative, and it's still something I'm kind of working on, but the narrative really is a historical piece, and it's bounded in time from when Franco was ending her marriage to I don't want to give too much away, but just after the lawsuit and what happened there, and the impact on the community. And there are, I mean, you see it in the film in Ahead of the Curve, there are some really sort of significant landmark things that happened throughout that period. And I've always known that we wanted to make sure we had included all of those things. It's such an important and exciting piece of our history. So that all was very clear. What was less clear was, and really simply because we just didn't know. I mean, Franco didn't know, and I didn't either, what is happening today. Who is doing this work now? Who are the people today who have that spirit that Franco embodied in, you know, as a 20-something baby dyke who wanted to figure out how to be in the world as it existed then. Who's doing that now? How are we connecting? And so really it was an exploration, and through the exploration, through talking with Kim, through talking with Denise, through talking with Amber, through talking with Andrea, we really started to get a clear picture of how it all fit together. And I mean, these women are extraordinary, and there are hundreds more extraordinary women out there doing, being activists and making themselves visible and telling their stories in ways that I'm sure Franco couldn't even imagine in the early 90s. It gets really, really shifted.
I couldn't even imagine the internet in the early 90s. So yeah.
Oh. Well, I also loved how you all sprinkled in, I call it a little bit of humor, but I was reminded of being a kid and at school doing like a bake sale or having a lemonade stand to raise some money. And I love that we're going to detail your motorcycle weekend, which seemed to like really correlate. And you did such a great job within the film of sort of building the tension right at that moment, because we have this bake sale and then we go into how the subscription to Curve starts. And, you know, I love that moment where you have that empty mailbox and then beat, 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 the real story comes. And I thought that you did such a great job of the smattering of humor, but also capturing the tension of that time, whether that's the political tension, the real personal tension of coming out to your family and the ramifications of that, and weaving, I think, what is just making a story that is so specific, but also sort of so universal. And were you thinking about that when you were telling the story?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the thing that really just hit it home for me, that this wasn't just a story for, you know, middle-aged lesbians, basically, is that is Franco's spirit. I mean, it's that, you know, what she did was extraordinary. She wanted, but really, it's something that anyone can do. You know, it's she saw what she needed in the world, and she went after it, and she built what she needed. She needed a guide to living life as a lesbian, and in doing that, she met the needs of her entire community. It's that, I think, if you get nothing else out of the film, it's that everyone has that potential.
Especially now with the age that we live in, you know, self-publishing, whether it be, you know, digital or audio or whatever it is really at everyone's fingertips. And if people don't see what they like out there, create your own content.
Like Kim does, like Andrea does.
Yeah. Who, Kim, who do you find inspiring these days around that, but that inspires the work that you're doing, that's making an impact?
I think that more and more, because of the kind of access that we have in online spaces, I'm really inspired by a lot of the LGBT folks who are working in disability justice. So folks like Mia Mingus, or like Noor Abdul, or, you know, even Leah Lakshmi too. I think that's another great example of really understanding. I think that that's a place that we often a lot of us don't talk about if we are able-bodied, often until we get to a point where we experience disability. And I think for the queer folks who have been talking about what it means to be queer and disabled, you know, explaining how when you don't get to have a choice with your movement, you don't always even get to have a choice with what you wear, or how you represent yourself, or how you signal to other people, or how you achieve that kind of representation. You know, so I really feel like a lot of the discourse that's coming out of those spaces is so significant. And particularly right now in kind of a COVID time, really talking about how we develop kind of an interdependence in our community, so that we're supporting, you know, people of various different ages, we're supporting people of various different kinds of access. I'm really interested in how we, very much what you said, you know, we design what we need to see in the world. Like, we're responsible for creating that. And so it's really a lot of disabled communities that are making those maps for us and showing, like, this is what's missing for big portions of our community who we don't often get to see represented. So how can we use whatever relative access and privilege we have in order to create more opportunity and power and stronger relationships with deaf LGBT communities or disabled LGBT communities?
Yeah. Andrea, I was wondering, one of the things that I was moved by in the film, that I think Curve did such a great job of, was representation and people seeing themselves, regardless of what kind of, you know, either lesbian, woman, trans person that you were seeing yourself in that magazine. And you know, I was thinking, you know, historically and today, like, what did that mean for you, and how do you sort of see that within the culture itself?
Yeah, so honestly, I think Jen and Rivka did a really excellent job of telling that narrative and actually going through very much the same path that Franco did. I mean, this was since the beginning that Franco really cared about representation. I mean, and not even just race and whether you were cis or trans, but also femme and butch, and what it meant to look like a queer woman. And I think that's something that's still pretty rare. I think that we're being much more intentional about actually going beyond the rainbow, which is actually what we are kind of looking for our impact campaign to be, right? To now that we have marriage, now that this conversation is more mainstream, what can we do next? And kind of going back to this idea of who inspires me. I mean, the next generation of queer people, they want to imagine something so much more. And I think especially now during COVID, like, they don't want to go back to normal. They want something more, right? And I'm seeing that now in terms of you know, the industry and what stories are coming out. You know, it's not just the stereotypical problematic lesbian stories of infidelity and involving a man in some way. kind of going beyond those harmful stereotypes and actually telling these real stories. And I will say also too, I think a big thing, representation, that I think we can do more of is kind of demystifying queer people, and heroes, right? I think Franco's story is extraordinary, but there are so many people like that are in the movement and across movements. I mean, people see us as extraordinary because they don't hear our stories, right? Our stories are not told. So people think that we're just one in a million, but I know of so many amazing queer people across movements. And I want to say now is a really good time to tell those stories because we need to hear them, right? I mean, literally in every march that I've gone to for Black Lives Matter, there's been a queer Black woman leading it. I mean, right now during COVID, I went to UNC Chapel Hill. I'm in Chapel Hill right now. The only reason why Chapel Hill ended classes was because of Black queer people who were actually holding the university accountable. I mean, they are everywhere. And it's so important for us to actually talk about their queerness because their queerness is what impacts their movement work. So I would say going forward, we're being really intentional with our impact campaign to talk about how everyone can be part of the movement and how the movement isn't just during Pride. It's not just within the context of the film, but rather the film is just one piece of the bigger story of investing in queer women leaders. And we hope that folks can be inspired by the film, that they can do this work every day, whether it's starting their own magazine, their own blog, writing music, doing art. I mean, even raising a family, that is activism, right? And it's something that I think, we've been really intentional about. We want folks to not just be like, not just be inspired by Franco and be mystified by it, but rather, think of what they can do next. And I think especially now, we have to pause because of COVID. And we really hope that we can have these really intentional discussions to not just go back to normal, but imagine what Pride could be if we return back to our radical roots. If we actually start imagining ways that we can be more inclusive and not just to check boxes, but rather actually build that intentional queer inclusive community. Imagine something more than just parades and bars and dina. And as great as those spaces are, they're not the end for the queer community. We should be imagining more. And I think that the film does a really good job of being intentional about that, about the different types of queer stories, different types of activism. And that's what we want to do with our impact campaign, is to make sure that folks know that your work, that our work, the movement, doesn't just stop with Pride or this film, that there's really so much more that we can do if we keep investing in queer women and queer stories.
Yeah. I love what you said about the film sort of, and Franco, this is going to you. I thought that, one of the great things about the film was there's a humility to it. And I think it ties into the conversation that Curve was having within our community, and the broad reach that you allowed within the magazine to be part of that, and also understanding how that magazine had an impact in both really deep ways on personal levels for people all around the world, but also within our community. And so what I found fascinating is it is a little bit of it's not a little bit, it is a hero story, but it's also an every person story. And what was it like to either watch some cuts or see the final film? Where did you come in the process of that story? And do you think it got you?
It was very interesting process for me because I gave Jen and Rivka complete access to 100% of my archives and my files and my family photos and my, stuff that I thought, I don't know why I'm keeping this. I would never let anyone see it ever. And I just said, okay, if you're doing this, go for it and don't feel, don't hold anything back. And because of my personal relationship with Jen, I felt comfortable having her ask those questions and answer them in a real honest way. And, I just want to make sure that people know when they see the movie, the magazine, might have been my brainchild, but it was definitely not done by me alone. Without an army of amazing women behind the project, it never would have happened. And if, if we mobilize, the community like those women mobilized to make that magazine on a crazy budget that people would never imagine.
Had a crazy schedule.
Oh, the schedule
with the monthly deadlines.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Jen hated them. Like 3 a.m. people sending me stuff, I imagine it's even more, the new owners publish stories. The joys of being at home.
I really feel like we're telling a lesbian right now, but
yes. We're cat fosters. There's one just going a little crazy. Anyway, I've lost my train of thought, but
you were saying that it takes an army and to do that, and yeah,
it does. I think projects are more successful when they do them in community. And talking about community, what we came to the realization is that the magazine is still continuing, although with COVID there's no print edition, and it is having a hard time. So what the new I say new, the publisher now, because I sold the magazine because of my disability, came to me with this idea that how can we ensure the legacy of Curve magazine for future generations? If it doesn't need to be a magazine, what should it be? And we are in the process of forming a nonprofit called the Curve Foundation that will amplify queer women's voices. And, I'm really excited about what it means, not only for us, but for the whole community. And if anybody wants to learn more about it, they can go to thecurvefoundation.org.
Thank you so much for mentioning it, because I wanted to, it's on my questions to to ask you about it. So that I appreciate you doing that. So please, everybody, follow up on that website, curvefoundation.org. And then I have a last question, and then we'll open it up for any sort of comments. But I was curious, how did doing this film impact your guys' relationship? Yeah, just that. How did it impact your relationship?
Well, speaking for myself, the bottom line is it brought us a lot closer, I think.
I didn't think it was possible because we're
pretty close already. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Having this project that gave me a focused reason to go out to Franco's family and friends and colleagues and women in the community who I might not have gotten to speak with, and old girlfriends, to really ask, like, what was she like? What was the impact that you saw of her work? And it allowed me a view of her that I would never have gotten otherwise. And so I have a much deeper appreciation. I feel like I got to know her because I didn't meet her until we were, in the middle of our lives. But I now feel like I got to know her as a young 20-something baby dyke, which is a huge treat.
Yeah.
Ooh, she's so hot.
I think for me, it just reinsured that I picked the right person.
Oh, baby.
Well, I will say one of the touching things about the film is your love is palpable also.
Good.
In that film. You feel the respect and the dignity and the appreciate, just the intimacy and the trust that's there. Franco, I think you said it so well. Like, I was able, the trust that was built in that relationship enabled me to open up, and that's really visible and really truly palpable in the film. So yeah.
I'm so glad that came through. Yeah, there was a lot of trust, and I am so grateful. I'm so grateful.
It was really interesting to have our kid, like I said, I don't know if I said this, but I actually watched the film for the first time in its completion at the drive-in, along with 2,500 people at the Frameline screening. That was the first time I'd seen it, and it was also the first time our two children saw it. And that was really powerful for me as well. And they came home and they were just like, we're really so proud of both of you.
Well, that's what you walk away with, I think. It is that dual, for both of you, the storyteller and the story itself. It's both are really beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing your life, your artistry, and your passion. Kim and Andrea, thank you both so much for being part of today's conversation and shining spotlights on the amazing and incredible work that you're doing, and how this continues to tie into the continuum of the story and how we tell our lives and how we live as lesbians. So thank you all so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Carrie,
This was
thank
really
you.
fun.
And thanks to everyone in LA and across the country that watched the movie.
Well, thank you guys.